Katie Pavlich from Townhall.com. She's with us in studio tonight. How you doing?
Doing well. And
Yeah,
yourself?
I'm good. I have to say, after listening to 4 hours of Eric Holder,
Yeah.
Continue to try to tell these stories that just don't add up. A little frustrated.
Right. And for him to, fall back on himself and say that the American people should be thanking him for the way that he's handled this situation. That we,
Give me some credit, he said.
Yeah,
give me some credit.
Give me some credit. The Justice Department has done really good things. And he listed some things off that I won't go into right now that weren't actually good things that the Justice Department has done, like the war on terror and giving terrorist civilian trials. I don't think that's a good thing, but he wants credit for that on top of the way he's handled Fast and Furious. But, a lot of what, we didn't hear anything new today. I don't think. I think today was the first hearing that the Democrats were in the House Oversight Committee were really able to kind of hijack the hearing away from its main focus and turn it into this kind of sideshow of, I know that you've been talking about the report, the so-called report that they released this week that's full of just basically false statements. I said earlier today it was embarrassing that they were even citing it in front of a congressional committee as something that was legitimate. But they did. Yeah.
It was, what was so funny to me is there was the big graphic that was put up, Stonewall City, talking about, and just kind of, highlighting the lack of cooperation that the House Oversight Committee has received from the DOJ. They talked about 80,000 documents that have been requested that the Inspector General has, but only 6,000 of those documents have been turned over to the House Oversight Committee. So when you talk about the report that was issued by the House Democrats, Elijah Cummings, and others that really, it tried to exonerate Eric Holder, say, just some low-level officials in Arizona.
And everyone in DOJ.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody at DOJ is completely blameless and guiltless. It's all on these few individuals there in Arizona. My point is, with 74,000 documents still outstanding, how on earth can anybody write that report saying they know exactly what happened in Fast and Furious?
Right, exactly. And the thing is going back to this argument of low-level rogue ATF agents, that was the original argument that they made back in January of 2011 when this whole thing was just getting started, right? So now we're back at zero with the arguments that they're making. And an really interesting part of the hearing today that wasn't, on the C-SPAN cameras or anything else is whistleblower John Dodson, who's kept a very low profile since coming out in March on the CBS News report, and after his testimony in June before the House Oversight Committee, he was there today, and they didn't announce it until right before the Attorney General showed up.
Right.
And I was watching him, and I just can't imagine how he feels when this is the argument that we're back to now. When we know that high-level officials within the Justice Department were talking about these tactics the same day that Brian Terry was murdered. Dennis Burke was talking to Eric Holder's top aide, Monty Wilkinson, about the connection between the two. And you have someone like John Dodson who has come forward, put his life on hold, put his career on hold just to expose the truth. And here we have the minority on the committee willing to go back to this argument of it was a bunch of low-level operatives in the ATF Phoenix field office when they've been exonerated of any allegations of that it was that, and in fact it was a high-level operation.
Right. It's incredible too, the email exchange that you mentioned between Dennis Burke and Monty Wilkinson, where Burke says, the guns that were found at the scene were part of the investigation we were going to talk about. To me, that indicates there was knowledge within the Attorney General's office of Fast and Furious. They were planning on discussing Fast and Furious, and Dennis Burke knew that Monty Wilkinson would know exactly what he was talking about whenever he said, these are part of the investigation we were going to talk about. When this was brought up, Holder's answer was, well, that indicates to me that we didn't have any conversations about it because we were going to talk about this. It was the most bizarre spin on this day. And there was another exchange too where there was an email that referred to Fast and Furious by name, did not contain the words wide receiver in it, and yet Eric Holder continued to say, no, this email is about wide receiver. It wasn't about Fast and Furious.
Right. And flashing back real quickly to the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing in November, when Senator Cornyn asked Eric Holder to explain the difference between wide receiver and Fast and Furious, and he couldn't do it, and Senator Cornyn said, are you winging it right now? So clearly, Eric Holder still doesn't really understand the difference between the two, or he's trying to cover himself and his department and really not revealing the tactics. And okay, so the email from Monty Wilkinson says we're going to talk about this investigation. So Holder makes the argument that we were going to talk about it, we never talked about it. Well, that doesn't excuse the 5 memos that are dated July, as early as July 2010 that happened, that surfaced.
Right.
And going back to Holder's testimony, today he said, I knew about the tactics being used. I knew about Fast and Furious in February. So now we go back to the timeline of in May 2011, he said that he'd known about it for a couple of weeks. Then he comes back in testimony in October after those memos surfaced and says, I should have said a few months. And so today now he's saying February.
Right.
Yet his top aide, who was in charge of all of his internal affairs and personal briefings, knew about the connection the day of Brian Terry's murder.
Yeah, I mean, that's, what, in order for that to be true, then what we have to believe is that his deputy chief of staff never said to the attorney general, by the way, the guns that were found there were part of an investigation that we were doing. Because if he had said that, the logical thing for Eric Holder to have said would be, what investigation?
Right.
And that would have started the whole chain. So we are left with, this is the Obama administration's position, that there is absolutely no curiosity within the upper echelons of the Justice Department to inform your boss about a fact that I think, is pretty darn germane. And I think Eric Holder would have said, yeah, I want to know about this. This is what they're telling us is going on at Justice right now?
I do think that the message of, the incompetence factor has been there throughout this process in the past year. But I think today we actually saw a lot of that getting hit home, of how incompetent not only Eric Holder is, but the whole department. And there was an exchange between Holder and Representative Raul Labrador, who was the first one to officially call for Eric Holder's resignation. And Eric Holder got really upset when Labrador started putting up these slides in the hearing room of statements he's made throughout the years, and even after Waco happened, of, I didn't read my memos. I didn't get that email. My staff didn't brief me. And the question was, are you really competent enough as the chief law enforcement agent in this country if you're not reading your memos that are really that important, if you don't know what's going on within your Justice Department? And to that point, one of my Facebook friends actually made this point of, the whole Gibson guitar thing. They knew exactly what kind of illegal wood Gibson Guitar was using in their guitars. You can't tell me that they didn't know, over 2,000 guns are walking to Mexico.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Right. Again, it just defies credulity. Now, one of the other aspects of this, and this was just sort of bizarre. At one point, one of the Democrats asked Eric Holder, no, I think it was one of the Republicans asked Eric Holder or made reference to the idea that Fast and Furious had a political outcome in mind in advancing the gun control agenda. And he went and said, oh, no, that's crazy. We never would have done anything like that. And yet, during this entire hearing, you have Democrats asking Eric Holder, well, what do you think about restoring the quote-unquote assault weapons ban? Oh, well, it's a long-standing position of the Obama administration that we need to restore the quote-unquote assault weapons ban. We need this new gun control law. We need that new gun control law. At the same time, he's saying,
no way.
Well, no, we never would have done it. He's now using Fast and Furious as a means to push for more gun control.
Right. So if they weren't using Fast and Furious and the crisis of guns come from America going into Mexico as an excuse for new gun control laws, now they're using the fallout as it, right? They're not letting their original plan of using this as a political process go to waste. And the frustrating part about this is on the oversight committee, and I hate for it to be between party lines, but that's the way it's been drawn. It's Democrats versus Republicans. Unfortunately, and it really shouldn't be that way. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. However, the Democrats are up there saying that this is a fishing expedition, that it's a political witch hunt, and quite frankly, I don't think that hundreds, if not thousands, of people eventually being killed and the death of Brian Terry and Jaime Zapata or are fishing expeditions. I simply think that getting to the bottom of it is the least we can do. So, going back to them making it a political issue, instead of asking real questions about why this happened, who's going to be fired, who's going to be held responsible, their questions revolve around gun control. And the question that didn't come up that I wish would have is if these new regulations of long gun reporting measures would have come up,
right,
or would have been in place during Fast and Furious, would have it prevented ATF from selling guns or forcing dealers to sell guns? And it wouldn't have. And that's the whole point, is this wouldn't have prevented anything. And the key to the gun control argument today that Holder made is, oh, we just want these long gun reporting measures to work like the handgun. We only want this. And that's how it starts. You know, they start with the handguns, and they start with the long guns, and then they start in the 4 states, and then they go national, because the argument will be, well, wherever these guns are showing up nationally, that's where we need the reporting measure, right?
Right.
Guns aren't going to stay in the 4 border states, and they know that.
Well, you know, and again, there's already the lawsuit going on against these new reporting requirements, but I thought it was interesting that Eric Holder, when trying to explain about the multiple reporting or the requirement for the sale of multiple handguns, you know, he couldn't even get it right. As to, you know, he said, I think this has been around since the mid '80s or so. I mean, this was part of the Gun Control Act of 1968, when Congress specifically included the multiple sale of handguns as a reporting requirement, but did not mention the sale of rifles or shotguns. You know, Congress at the time, and Congress ever since, has had the ability to set that requirement, but they never have. The Obama administration knew that this wouldn't get through Congress, and that's why they decided to do an end run around Congress and institute these new reporting requirements. You know, it's the arrogance on display today too. We've got to mention this. There was a great deal of not just the finger pointing, but there was
racist, by the way, obviously. Just saying.
Yeah. But you know, I'm the Attorney General, and the statement of, you know, why don't I get credit for the good things that I mean? There was really a lot of hubris, I think, displayed by the Attorney General. You know, a lot of impatience. He kept referring to, and the Democrats on the panel kept referring to how many times he's talked about this, as if it's, you know, a huge burden on him to go to Congress and talk about this investigation that put thousands of guns in the hands of Mexican drug cartels.
Well, the bottom line is, if he would have come clean the first time when he testified, maybe he wouldn't be at the 6th hearing where we need to ask additional questions when he gives us non-answers. I mean, that's what we ended up with today, and more non-answers, which means we're still going to be requesting documents. We're still going to be holding hearings. We're still going to be interviewing people. I'm sure, you know, Congressman Issa has a laundry list of people he still wants to interview about this, especially when you have 74,000 documents still outstanding.
Right.
You know, Eric Holder could have dumped everything out on the table right at the beginning, but instead he's made this mess for himself. So for him to come back now and say, I've been here 6 times, you know, this is exactly how he said it. I am the Attorney General of the United States, as if he was above reading his memos and his emails because of that.
Yeah.
And if anything, he should be reading more emails and more memos than anyone else to make sure he knows what's going on in his department. But clearly he doesn't seem convinced of that.
Not everybody has your work ethic, Katie. All right, so I got to ask you one more question before we let you go, because you were in the room. You know, the cameras were focused on Eric Holder, but there was a team from the Justice Department behind him, including Ronald Weiss, the Deputy Attorney General. What was their body language? What was going on with them that we couldn't see?
They were very uncomfortable, I will say that. Ronald Weiss is the one who signed his name to the February 4th letter that was so full of false statements that had to be withdrawn from Congress. And let's remember that the emails and the backstory of that is they were talking to each other about how they could, you know, get around explaining these allegations and saying they were going to outright deny gun walking happened, which was a lie. So Ronald Weiss signed his name to that letter, testified about it before Congress on June 15th, 2011. And today, when the topic of the letter came up, he was rushing back and forth between Holder, telling him stuff in his ear, sitting back down. He was really red, looked like he was going to pass out. He was not sitting well. And the other Justice Department officials who were sitting next to him, and I don't know their names, but they kept looking back and forth at each other and kind of, you know, rocking a little bit. And they were really nervous because, you know, they're all the problem with a cover up is you have to remember what everyone else has said, right?
Right.
And you can tell whenever Holder or Ronald Weiss or even Janet Napolitano testifies, they sit there because they have to think about, okay, so what has the president said? What has Eric Holder said? What have I said? Are all of our stories straight? Because we have to make sure all of our stories are straight because we're supposed to have the same story and make sure we're consistent.
Yeah.
And so they were very, very uncomfortable. And, you know, Ronald Weiss didn't look good, and he constantly had to go up to Holder and tell him, I don't know what he was saying, but he was up and down a lot, and he didn't look good. He was pretty red. So very uncomfortable situation for them today.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Katie, I really appreciate you coming in studio, and look forward to you reporting on this on Townhall. You've been getting a lot of praise around the blogosphere and the internet for the work that you've been doing on Fast and Furious. So please keep it up.
I will, absolutely.
All right,
I'm not going to let it die.
Katie Pavlich from townhall.com.